All right, so David and Betsie Bell, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I have spent the last 20 plus years in ministry as a junior high director, and then I did some teaching in a Christian school, and then started pastoring in a church here in Indy with young adults, and another role with leadership. And so that's been the most recent of what I've done. Right now, I'm in the midst of launching both a ministry business really, with the Enneagram, and sharing stories with people of how they can understand themselves with the Enneagram, and teaching workshops. And then another nonprofit initiative that we'll be launching this fall. So it's been a season of transition for us in that way. Obviously married to this beautiful woman, and we have 3 children, a 15-year-old, 13-year-old, and 7-year-old. And yeah, it's probably enough about us, for me at least for now.
So Betsie, tell me it from your perspective. So
when I'm not home with my family, I work with first graders during the week at a school. And yeah, we're just really busy with life right now and trying to figure out how to raise teenagers. And it's...
And an elementary school aged child and a middle schooler. So yeah, all 3.
Yeah.
Wow. So
it's a great ride.
So how did you guys first meet and get married, and tell us that story?
Okay. Well, we met at Taylor University about 25 years ago, and we actually lived in the same dorm. And I remember listening to David sing a song at chapel, and he just kind of stood out to me as like somebody with a lot of like passion in what he was singing about in his relationship with the Lord. And I wrote him a note that
I read into as potential interest from her.
Which was like a little bit, but I was encouraging him.
She's been very encouraging, and I was a senior, and I knew who she was, and I was determined to take her on a date. And so she sent me that note, and I used that as a clue that I should ask her out for a date. And we won't go into the whole story, but...
Well, it worked out well.
It worked out well. It took 3 attempts on my part over 3 years to finally see her fall in love with me, and it took me living in the basement of her parents' house while she was a senior at Taylor in Birmingham, Alabama. But it worked. So.
I want to stop you right there. So why did you turn him down?
I decided when I was going from Alabama to Indiana for college that I was just going to have a good time and learn a lot, and I wasn't planning to find my spouse. So I really was wanting to go back to the South and marry somebody from the South. Cool. And so...
I'm not from the South. I'm from New York.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously don't have that accent along with her. So I didn't fit the bill for that sense.
Yeah, and so in my mind, like that just was not going to work out.
Gotcha. So you just repeatedly turned him down, but you ended up in her mother's basement. How did that happen?
Well, I went to seminary after Taylor to Birmingham, Alabama. I went to school down there. And it's actually through my friendship with Betsie that we did become friends, even in my attempts to have more than a friendship. And so through that, ended up connecting with her parents. They were very welcoming as I was transitioning. And I inadvertently misunderstood something her mom said and thought they were inviting me to live in the basement. And I kind of invited myself to live there by mistake.
Wow.
But they were happy with that because her mom and dad liked me. So
you misinterpret things a lot. So
yeah, that's probably true.
But the thing is that it works out for the best.
It did, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so then you moved into the basement, and then I can understand how then you would have to see Betsie a lot more often. And
she would come home for breaks, and so we would start to talk. And she saw me on her turf in Alabama, and so it just changed the perspective. And finally, she fell in love with me.
Yeah.
So.
God changed my heart really, and I was able to just accept that He had brought like this amazing person right to me, and I needed to embrace it more. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a fun story. Okay, so that's a great story. So you guys get married, you've had 3 children, you've been a pastor, you're now starting ministry business out on your own. When were you first introduced to the Enneagram?
2011, so about 7-8 years ago.
Okay.
the church where I was serving at the time had initiated basically these retreats for us as staff. So as staff, we're serving the congregation, and so they brought in some former pastors who had a ministry to basically serve us and see us grow in our spiritual formation and take care of our hearts and our souls as those doing ministry in that way. And at one of the retreats, they introduced the Enneagram, and it was something I gravitated to very quickly because as I learned about it, learned about my style, Enneagram 3 is my core style, it resonated so much with what was happening in my life in that season and the previous years, and I just saw this potential and really just began to learn more about it. And I basically took it home to her and shared with Betsie about it, and then we began to read some books and eventually did some trainings to learn more. And
so Betsie, what was your first impression of the Enneagram?
I distinctly remember being on a little weekend getaway in Michigan with David, and we were jumping in, like I took an inventory and we started to talk about it more, and I was devastated. It was horrible. Like I was in tears, and I really couldn't believe that like I needed to embrace all of this. So it was really, it took like a big,
what was
like,
so
the wind out of me.
discouraging about the Enneagram for you?
Well, at that time, I actually thought that I was a different number. I kind of was misidentified for about 4 years. So I thought that my core was a 1. And so at that time in my life, there was a lot of stress, like circumstantially, with our family. And I was homeschooling and had a toddler. And like, I just couldn't be good enough at all, like everything that I was trying to do. And so it just was really, it's challenging. So I would say that was my first introduction. And then as we really got into it more and I started to take a deeper dive, like I realized like, okay, actually I am more of a core 6. I have a lot of 1, but understanding like when I understand my motivation and that it's rooted out of needing to be secure, that kind of changed things a little bit for me. So,
Lots of people say that when they learn their number or learn about the Enneagram, that it's both encouraging and discouraging. So we started with you, David. Tell me what's most discouraging about the Enneagram to you, and then we'll dig out of that hole and we'll go to the encouraging part.
And it's a good hole because so many other types of personality systems. The Enneagram is not a personality system, in my opinion. It's truly what people call it, the wisdom of the Enneagram. But as it kind of gives character typing, so many others that we use in situations like business or even in relational contexts, they're all based on the behavior. So what makes it discouraging is when you start seeing these motivations and the Enneagram's uniqueness, that it's really rooted in your motivation. And I think the only reason it wasn't quite as discouraging for me when I first learned it, or humiliating as sometimes people talk about, is because I had just come out of 3 years of counseling, that the Enneagram just named everything that I had been counseling about for the past 3 years, and the shame as a 3 that I feel deep down with who I am. I would say coming out of that, what has been discouraging, even as I continue to learn and know more, is that 3s are the most out of touch with their feelings of any number on the Enneagram. And I always thought I was such a good feeling person, and people would even sometimes compliment me like, oh, you're a guy who actually knows what you actually feel, like you're able to share, and I've learned maybe what I'm sharing might not actually be the truth, because I have this propensity to deceive mostly myself of what I'm really feeling on the inside. So it's discouraging to think like, I can sense these feelings, but I can have a really hard time getting at them with accuracy. And if I don't get them accurately, then some of my behavior ends up going sideways because of that.
Yeah. Let me, before we jump into the encouraging part, what's most encouraging about it, because I want to go there. Yeah, I think that there are probably some people who are going to be watching this who don't know kind of a quick what the Enneagram is. And so why don't we give like a sentence-long definition and just a quick overview?
Well,
let me ask Betsie. Betsie, from your perspective, because you come from a unique perspective as as someone who teaches it, you're living it, but you're more of a practitioner, and he's a practitioner and a trainer. So I want to get it from your perspective.
What is the Enneagram?
Yes.
I would say it is a way forward in understanding yourself better and understanding your relationships with other people. And as you take the journey, you are able to get healthy and be stronger in knowing who you are, and then in knowing how you can relate to other people better. And ultimately, like, you're able to offer compassion to people instead of judgment, and everything you can imagine, like more patience and more love and more joy as you get healthy. So
Gotcha. So expound on that a little bit.
Well, so it's a wisdom that offers insight into 9 styles of character type. And so, yes, it is a way of saying that all human beings would fit into one of 9 core styles, and it's wisdom about each of those styles. And as Betsie said, it's a way of understanding yourself then. But when you understand yourself, you have this moment that says, oh, they look at things different than I do. There's 8 other ways of seeing this situation or seeing this relationship, and so it breeds compassion in that way.
Gotcha. Okay, so Betsie, what's most like, you got off on the wrong foot. So the story goes that you get exposed to the Enneagram, you end up in tears,
which is fairly common.
Which is fairly common, yes.
It really is. And my work and the work that we get to do together, it's not uncommon for people to feel that. And in fact, when they do, that's usually a really good sign.
Yeah, I start with denial and then anger.
Yeah.
So and then the tears aren't public. So what was most encouraging to you about the Enneagram?
I would say really it's just that I can be healthier. I don't know that I would say because I'm a loyal person, like that's encouraging to me, but it's the other, I go to the negative and then bring it out of there. So I don't have to stay where I am. I can get healthier using this tool, and that I don't need to live in fear. And so I'm really grateful that I can move towards health.
You brought up a really good point, which is you don't have to stay there. So we talk about the Enneagram in terms of motivations and bent and wiring and DNA, and this is the core, and then but we don't have to stay there. And I think that if that were a continuum where people can err to one side or the other, they'll say, this is the way I am, I can't change. And then there's other people who aren't bent on doing what's right without insight or awareness into these inner motivations and inner core feelings and thoughts and perceptions. So could you speak to that a little bit, David? Tell me a little bit about how the Enneagram says, this is who you are, but you don't have to stay there.
Right. The uniqueness of the Enneagram is that it is dynamic. Anything else that I've at least come across in my experience that wants to give me insight into myself says, by such and such an age, this is the way you approach this or do this. And that's it. There you go. This explains your behavior. But because the Enneagram is about your motivations, it's about how you then can move with those motivations to behavior that is unhealthy and excessive, or you can move towards health. Because in the Enneagram, the best part of you is the worst part of you. So if I can just really simply say, for myself as a 3, my gifting is to get things done, to be productive and be efficient, and frankly, be successful a lot of the time just because of the way that I've been created. That's my gift. That's the best part of me. And it becomes the worst part of me when I'm a workaholic. And it becomes the worst part of me when I make my success my identity, and it becomes excessive, and then I'm unhealthy. So I have an opportunity. Understanding my motivation is to feel loved for my work and my successes, to say, well, I can do that well if I know I'm loved by God and that my security is in God's love. And I will do that in an unhealthy way if I'm using my success to make me feel loved. That's unhealthy. I can move on a continuum, and every number is that way. You always have a dynamic continuum. I love how Betsie said the encouragement of that is, I can be my truest self in Christ. I can move towards health. That's what the Enneagram's telling me. I'm not stuck in behavior. I actually can use my motivations, and I can do Enneagram work, and I can practice spiritual disciplines, and I can call out to God's Spirit above all, and the Spirit of God can help me move in this wisdom to be more of who God has ultimately created me to be.
Yeah, Suzanne Stabile once said that emotions are morally neutral. Anger is not bad. Anger isn't good.
What it is.
So, in the same way, I think that maybe emotions and motivations and those kinds of things that are bent are they're us, and then we have these choices to go from there.
Yes, Suzanne Stabile uses the phrase, "That's just how you see." It's just the way you see. And then now it's about what you do with it. So for Betsie as a 6, she's just going to see insecure possibilities, things that could move her out of a place into fear, but it's just how she sees all the things that could go wrong. Well, there's a gift in that because she plans really well, and when things do go wrong, she's ready for it. We've experienced that in this last year with the strength that she's offered us with some of our transition. And yet also she could move to a worst case scenario place that paralyzes her in fear. I can walk into a room and I just see what needs to be done, and I can do it, and I can do it efficiently and move us quickly, and I can gather others to do it. But I can also do that in an excessive way and use people, manipulate people. But it's just how you see. And then, as you say, it's kind of neutral, but then you move with it from there. So,
Betsie, let me pull you in because he just, I think, described a situation where you see things a certain way, but also can you challenge if you're seeing things accurately? Because it almost seems like we can go to a worst case scenario, but I don't know if that's healthy. It's healthy to say what would happen if, but maybe the probability of that happening would be very low, and we can ruminate on it.
Yes.
So how do we understand that this is the way we see, but also say are we seeing things accurately?
Well, I think, yes, having that understanding. So when I understand that my core is, I will automatically go to the worst case scenario, probably, but I have to consciously stop it and just say, okay, that could happen. And if it happens, then we'll do this. But I'm not going to go into that whole spiral thinking of going on ruminating about it. I am in health, I am going to say, God, you're in control. I trust you, you have taken care of us, you will continue, and then I need to let it go. And I need to go on to something else.
So therefore, you're acknowledging the way you see, and then you're saying, but maybe the way I'm seeing things is not what's most healthy, and I can choose different.
And we become then true partners in it, and this is one of the gifts that the Enneagram has brought to our marriage is then, because I know that about her, if she needs help with that, or if I recognize she's leaning towards spiraling, I know if I just start asking her questions, I help her pull out of the spiral. When she senses something's wrong in me, so my issue is this thing about feelings, do I really know what I feel? And I push them away, and feelings just get in the way. When you want to be productive and efficient, don't deal with your feelings, because feelings, they're annoying.
They hinder your success, they hinder your productivity.
But the funny part is I can't really be my best self without those feelings. I can't. And so she can sense in me then, okay, what are you really feeling? And she can ask me questions to try and draw my feelings out, which means I've got a way better chance when my feelings are in play to move towards health. In fact, if my feelings are not in play, I can't move towards health. Just like if she's not thinking through and just lets herself spiral, she can't move towards health without that. So then we get to help each other because we know that about each other. We could have used that in our marriage before the Enneagram came into our life, but we're certainly blessed by it now because we continue to go deeper with each other because of this insight and this wisdom.
Gotcha. Okay, so let me ask some tougher questions.
Thanks.
Okay, feel free to, however you want to answer this, but what's been most difficult about your marriage?
Well, I'll speak to the circuit. We've had a few circumstances that we've walked into that would tend to be like a season of marriage that have been challenging. When we had been married 4 months, David's dad passed away, and that was a really hard thing, obviously, but just to be so like young in our marriage, that was
it was sudden, unexpected, tragic.
And so that was really challenging to work through. And then we had 2 baby boys within 20 months of each other. So I would say like just having them so close, and then dealing with some postpartum depression and just the issues that come with having little kids that you're raising, and just so drained and trying to understand and communicate with one another. That was a really challenging season. And then in 2008, that was another really challenging season when David was going through his issues with anxiety that he kind of alluded to earlier with counseling and that kind of thing. So those were 3 seasons, I think, that were really challenging. And yeah, God gave us grace in moving, through those.
We sensed with each one, these are the things that, are they're outside of us. Excuse me. They're outside of us, and they can either push us together as a couple, or they can like hop over us and start to push us apart. And the outside circumstances that happen in your life, even some of them being outside of our relationship, like my anxiety that I was dealing with was not in relationship to something between us. It was because of my Enneagram motivations to be successful and be a workaholic, frankly. I put myself in an anxious place. She didn't ask for postpartum depression, and it just kind of came for a little while after she gave birth to our second child. So those certainly. We've had some moments along the way. Probably one of the biggest moments, and we learned a lot from it, was our 3rd year of marriage, when I basically let my attention drift to my job and my students instead of her. And we were in that season of moving from the honeymoon stage of our marriage into the realistic phase of our marriage. And the Enneagram now gives us insight into what was happening back then. We didn't have it to tell us. We actually were talking in the recent week even about what would have happened if we had known the Enneagram to explain what happened. But basically, in essence, really quickly, it was a period where that attention of students, and in particular, there were 5 cute 18-year-old seniors in high school who would be at my desk every morning. I was 27 years old at the time, and one night, Betsie looked at me and she said, "You love the attention of your students more than you love being with me." And I looked at her and I said, "You're right, and that's wrong." And it was a wake-up call for us of how easy it is to drift, and a wake-up call of what are you going to do with this, that in the honeymoon phase, you just want to be with each other, and you've had this mysterious like desire to know one another, and you start to lose mystery as you move into realistic phase of your marriage, and you can have something else draw your attention. Well, as 3s, we want to be loved and valued, and we think that we're loved and valued for what we do. That's our wounded message. We think that we have to do things for people to love us. Well, these students, I had a great relationship with my students. They gave me lots of value and want and love, frankly. And so I was drawn that way. And it jerked us back. It was months of sharing with our small group, of reading, of submitting ourselves to each other, and realizing like, okay, we have the opportunity to really get to know one another. And to think that after 2-3 years of marriage, we know each other and the mystery's gone, that's just crazy. 20 years of marriage, the mystery's not gone. I don't know her fully. And so that was a seminal point in our relationship that I think has actually helped us in future years to be protected from some other things that could have happened.
So, Betsie, let me ask you, because this is, thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty and your authenticity in all of this, because I know that that's really hard, and I think that a lot of people will gloss over it. But I think that a lot of people who will be watching this are either in the midst or have gone through things like that. What practical advice, like sharing in the small group is good, but I think it's not specific enough for somebody to say, who's watching this and go, I'm in that season right now, what could I do? What practical advice would you give them?
Well, I would say if you need to go to counseling, like go to counseling. Like, it's so easy to just think like, oh, that's not for me, or like you have to be really broken for that. But it's like the truth is we all benefit, and it's a wonderful tool that can be used, I think, for growth and healing.
Okay, David, what are some practical things, like what were some specific things that you did in the midst of that to provide healing in your marriage?
We read a really important book, actually. Our small group had decided to read Intimate Allies by Dan Allender, and that was very important. And because we were reading that together, the conversations, there came a chapter and a thought in there that to this day, when we do, excuse me, to this day when we do premarital counseling, we talk about one of the center points of that book because it was so important to us to get through that time. So counseling for sure, like asking people for help, and we've both done that in our journey together. But then what can you read? And yes, the small group is really important. Like who around you then is going to help you? Who are you talking to? Who am I going to talk to say, hey, I just had this conversation with my wife and admitted this, and because she called me out and she's right, and I now need you as my friend to help me figure out what's going on inside of me that I'm wanting this attention from students more than I want my wife's attention. So people, you just can't do it alone.
So what was the message that Allender brought about in the book that was so pivotal?
Yeah. Pedestal effect.
The pedestal effect.
You have your spouse on the pedestal. I had Betsie on a pedestal.
So tell me more about that, Betsie.
Well, David would just say, like, everything that he did was related to me, and like he had me on this pedestal, like I could not do anything wrong. And so, I mean, that was really interfering with our marriage. So I think you've said, like, even if he dropped a dish in the kitchen, like somehow he would turn that into like,
if you dropped a dish,
Oh,
I
sorry,
would say it's
if
my
I-
fault. Like,
yeah.
I should have cleared the counter space, or I should have
Yeah.
made sure that dish was dry so that it wouldn't slip out of her hands. Like emotionally, that's what I was doing to her.
You would blame
she was
yourself,
not
yeah.
asking for it. She was not asking for me to have her on this pedestal. She was not unwilling to say if she made mistakes.
You have a two-wing?
I do.
Because I'm a two, and that's
So
something
you're
a two would do.
resonating, right?
Yeah.
But I had her there. And part of it, I mean, this may sound really silly, part of it went back to the fact that when I first met her, like, she was untouchable to me. Like, she was this beautiful, kind, gentle, strong, sweet Southern belle that I had no business ever dating when I first learned of her at Taylor. And so but in a way, like, that carried on. But one of the keys in that was then I felt like that carried into nothing was a mistake that she made. It always came back to me. And so what it meant is I wasn't being honest. I wouldn't be honest to say, hey, this hurt me when you did this. Or this conversation and feeling dismissed in this conversation, that actually hurt. Instead, I would reframe it into something like, well, I must have done something wrong that now I need to go fix. And I actually haven't thought about this till this moment, but it probably roots back in my Enneagram core of I can make everything successful. Like, that's part of my false self is not only am I driven by success, not only am I effective in what I do, I also think I can basically make anything successful. Right. So I reframe failure into success. So, well, if I'm at fault for something in our relationship, I'll just fix it and make it successful. And it's easier for me to take that on than to actually be truthful with her and have her have to ask forgiveness.
Betsie, let me ask you, because David brought up a really interesting insight when he said that my wounded message is that I have to be successful. What would be your wounded message, and what does transformation to a new message, what would that be?
My wounding message is that I'm not safe. And so, and I don't really, it's interesting because when I really think about like how I learned that, it's a challenge for me because I don't feel like I grew up in a family that was unsafe. And so, that's interesting, but I try to embrace that. And I think for me, it's just kind of shifting those thoughts of like, okay, I am safe. And David, I think in our relationship, he provides a lot of safety and security for me in lots of ways. And so that's been really healing for me.
Yeah, we've reflected back on when we were dating and about to get engaged. You've talked about some of the challenges you were going through in your life and how you felt like God brought me into a place of helping those go away just because I gave you a different message that you were okay.
Yes,
Wow.
absolutely.
And you could trust yourself and you didn't need to be in control of certain things like you thought.
Yes. Yep.
Wow. Okay, so I remember us having dinner a while back, and you said something that was so insightful. Bess brought it up in the car ride on the way home about how you said your relationship with your spouse should be the safest relationship you have on this earth.
Yes.
I totally agree, but I also think that majority of people married, it's not their safest relationship.
Which is incredibly sad.
But it could be their mother, it could
Yeah.
be their best friend, it could be somebody else. So could you speak to that a little bit in terms of how helpful that could be inside of a marriage, just knowing that?
Well, first I want to acknowledge that it does make me sad that for some people, like, it's just not the case. You know, here you have this couple that...
But let me stop you right there, because what we've just been talking to up till now, if you put your wife on your pedestal, she's not the safest relationship.
No, she's not.
So,
She's not.
So I think that people kind of know this in the theoretical.
Right.
And they think, oh, that would be great. And then all of a sudden there are these things that they're not cognizant of.
Right.
Well, it's not self-aware at a conscious level that they're putting their wife on a pedestal that's hindering that
Right.
relationship being the safest relationship on earth.
Yeah.
So I think that even though a lot of people, their spouse isn't their safest relationship, they want it to be and don't know why it isn't. So
Yes, that's so true.
Can you
So the
speak to that?
transparency, right? Like, so when I finally could say to Betsie back then, okay, I can't have you on a pedestal. I need to tell you when something's wrong. And we've had to continue to grow in that. And the Enneagram the last 7-8 years has been so helpful for us to be able to be clearer in what's going on between the two of us in that way. Then you get to authenticity. You get to true truth. You're not deceiving yourself like, oh, she's perfect and it must be always my fault. That's a self-deception. You know, she's not deceiving me with that in our case. So yes, couples then can move towards that secure place with one another, which is the desire, right? Like you stand before a minister or an officiant and you say, I'm going to love you for the rest of my life. And it's the only relationship that we have. We've talked about this as a couple. The only relationship where a person consciously chooses to promise to unconditionally love the other person. We've not made that promise to our children. Like, we will because we're parents, but parents don't automatically have this promise. Children don't automatically have a promise to their parents to love them and be in relationship with them. We're the only two people to promise each other, I'm going to be in relationship with you for the rest of your life, and it's going to be unconditional to the best of my ability by God's grace. That is an incredibly secure place to start from theoretically, and now it's trying to practice that and live that out, and that you can find that place of security. And so we see that with each other. We see it in, even as you were talking about wounding messages, how we see that we are meant to be the first human answer to our wounding messages by being in each other's life. God ultimately is the healer. But that security comes when I bring safety to her, when she tells me I'm loved for who I am and not for what I do, not for my success. That breeds security between the two of us.
So God is using each of you as an instrument for healing to the
Without
other.
question.
Absolutely.
Without question.
So how has God redeemed some of these difficult parts of your marriage? Well, how has God helped to transform you individually into more Christ-likeness and helped make your marriage a better relationship?
Well, going through the hard makes you honest about who you are and how you respond to it. So God's redemption has been clear in those ways of honestly responding to what's happening. The time of anxiety in 2008 that lasted for a few years, has helped me be honest with you. You have your identity wrapped up too much in your work. Now, Enneagram language, your success. So that's been redeemed with, by God's grace, work that still has been good and that has had successes, but not at the expense of me dealing with anxiety, right? So the goodness of God to help me keep that, for example, in perspective. And for us, I think for us as a couple, we've found that we can relate to couples in certain circumstances and speak to things that we've experienced, and how can we speak into their life with what their challenge is in that moment and give them hope of, this is how God's brought healing to us. This is where unity's come from for us in our relationship through those things that were hard or are hard.
What are some things that you most misunderstood about each other going into marriage?
Wow.
We could do a whole
21
session.
years. What do I misunderstand? Your Southern accent? Just kidding. I loved your Southern accent. I want it to come back.
Well, I think as we've learned, like, the Enneagram and had
yes.
like better language for how to like express our misunderstandings. I know, like, for me, I struggle to believe in myself and trust myself with what I think about things. And so it can be hard for me to just, like, I don't think in real time. I don't argue in real time. I need time to process. And so I think, and I just take a little bit of time to, like, share what I'm thinking. So if David can, like, understand that I need a little more time, then it, like, helps the whole communication piece. If he's rushing through and wanting to accomplish, like, okay, we need to talk about this or that, and I'm not able to give him the answers that he wants right away, I know that can be really frustrating. So I think we've
Do you
kinda
have
come
a
through that a little bit.
future time orientation?
No, I'm present.
You're present.
He's future.
Oh, wow. I would have assumed present.
Yeah, sixes are present time oriented.
Right, but just the not the number as much as a description. If someone says, I need time to process, I would have thought that wouldn't have been present. But you're a future?
I'm future, yeah, as a 3. And so so for her, like, working through what's in her mind in the present, which again, like, we knew when we got married and as we were going into our marriage, that no surprise to anybody that knows us, that I'm the verbal processor who can blab and blab and blab, and that she's quieter, and that it's going to take more time for her to share. I thought that the reasons for that were one thing, and the Enneagram has shown the light of the reasons why she would take time. So I have memories of being early in our marriage, lying in bed thinking, asking her questions about how she feels about something, and, you know, you taking time to answer or not having an answer immediately and then telling me the next morning at breakfast or something, and I didn't, oh, she's just an internal processor, or, oh, I don't know what I exactly thought then. Now I understand why.
Yeah. You know what? I think I jumped ahead with time orientation. Could you describe what time orientation is and why it matters, why it's so important?
Yeah. Well, it's connected to, well, it doesn't matter what it's connected to right now. Never mind. So yeah, each number fits into one of 3 time orientations: future-oriented, present-oriented, or past-oriented. And time orientation simply is this, that where you are grounded. It doesn't mean that not every number doesn't, like, maybe think about the future or reflect on the past. I can be fairly nostalgic, actually, into the past. But where I'm grounded is what opportunities lie before me in the future. So when I'm nostalgic in the past, I'm using that nostalgia to think about what could be in the future as a 3. So 3, 7s, and 8s are future-oriented. 1s, 2s, and 6s are present time-oriented, meaning they're just grounded in the present of what's happening here. So even for some people, this is counterintuitive. They think, but a 6 can sometimes worst case scenario out. Isn't that future? It's not. It's taking the present moment and thinking about all the things that could go wrong in the present with this situation. And so they're right there in the present, even if it's like, oh, we're going on a trip and we might have a flat tire and what could happen with that. It goes back to, so what can I do in the present to make sure we don't get a flat tire and aren't stranded in the middle of Kansas on the interstate? But it's present grounded. So 1, 2s, and 6s are present, and then 4, 5s, and 9s are grounded in the past. So they talk about the past. A way of this being seen is simply if a couple, let's say it's a married couple, is just lying down in bed reflecting on the day. A 3, 7, and 8 is going to reflect on their day by talking about what they're going to do tomorrow because of today. They might not even mention today. Like, well, how was your day? Well, it was good because tomorrow I'm going to, and they just move there. The 1, 2, and 6 will just talk about the day. And the 4, 5, and 9 will reflect on all the things that happened in the day and what things they want to go back and change and wish they hadn't had that conversation or said it that way. And then they might start going back not just one day, but a couple days or even a week and keep going.
All right, so Betsie, let me ask you, how is this insight helpful for relationship and communication?
Well,
We're off script, I know.
I would say for me, being able to understand David and where he's coming from and a little bit more of his motivations, it just helps me to communicate with him in a way that is helpful and loving and meets his needs more than just like communicating in a way that I like or in my style. You know, it's easy, right, to like, if you love to receive gifts from, like that's your love language, then you would tend probably to give a gift to somebody because that's what you love. And so it's kind of like self-focused a little bit. So if I can turn it around instead of thinking about my style and what I need and think about what he is needing, then we both benefit, right?
Well, and look, it's as simple as for me, because I'm future-oriented, I end up being quick thinking and I end up interrupting her. So she's trying to tell me something, and she's just in the present moment with it. I'm already in my head, heard half of what she said, already decided what she's going to say for the other half, so I'm already at what this means for the future, and I ended up either talking over her, interrupting her, or finishing her sentence, usually wrong, by the way. And so that's like me forcing my time orientation in a way on her. And so that just plays out for us in these ways as well. Let me just say, too, this has been a tremendous gift for us this summer because we've been in a season of transition that has impacted us in terms of occupation and in terms of even our financial situation, for example. And so I've said to her at times when I've been future-oriented, anxious, worried about what this holds and some of our financial situation. And so I'll say, are you doing okay? Are you worried about this, anxious? And she'll just say, well, we have money today. And I'm like, how do you do that? I'm worried about where our money's going to come from. She's not even thinking because she's present-oriented. We have money today. We're okay. And that is a gift.
Yeah.
A gift because I need that grounding. Otherwise, I go to deeper anxiety. But she also needs me to be thinking about the future, so we're actually prepared for that at the same time.
Betsie, tell me, how does that work? Because in one sense, if you take a trip out to Kansas, you're thinking about all the things that could go wrong between here and Kansas, but you're not. But that's, if you use that as a metaphor for the journey in the head, you're not thinking that way about the future, but you are thinking about that way in a trip. Like in a trip, you would think, what are all the things that could go wrong? But in right now, you transitioning, you're not thinking about all the things that could go wrong. Well, how does that work?
Well, I will say, like, it's actually doing the work. I mean, if you are like doing the work to like work the Enneagram, to learn about yourself, to take care of your soul, and be strengthened, then you have, like for me, then I have the courage that I need, and I am not going to automatically go to that worst case scenario thinking, or like if I have like, I might just have like a fleeting thought, and it doesn't, it's just kind of like for me in strength, I can just say, that might happen, but it probably won't. And yeah, God's going to take care of us and like just not go there. So I would say being healthy and strong in your in character and taking the time to go deeper in like the soul transformation obviously is like what makes you healthier, so that you aren't going to those unhealthy thoughts immediately.
Gotcha. Gotcha. What advice would you give to a married couple who want to understand and love each other better? I wanted to get that exactly right, because I think, I mean, ultimately, that's the whole purpose of this video.
I think it's about being healthy kind of what I just mentioned. It's like if you're willing to do the work and to get healthy, then you can offer your best self to your spouse, and then you're stronger as a couple.
We'll have people ask us, what's the best numbers for compatibility for, getting married or something like that. And the answer is 2 healthy numbers.
Yeah.
Now, nobody lives in health all the time, but living average to health and continually moving towards health and wholeness in your number and who you are and who God's made you uniquely to be, that's what matters. So, yeah, that work is vital.
What are a couple of practical things somebody could do to become more healthy? Like, it's still in the ethereal for many people. Like I'm sure that people, before they even watch this video, they're watching this video because they want to get healthy, and they're saying, what are some things I can do to become more healthy?
It so depends on your number. I mean, there's different Enneagram work that each number can do that relates to that. But generally, for example, each number can look at what their vice is and look at what their virtue of transformation is and how can they live towards their virtue of transformation. So if her vice is fear, how does she live towards courage through faith? If my vice is deception, how can I live more truth in my life? Well, then a practical way for me to live more truth is to end every day doing for example, the spiritual practice of examine, where I review what I did today, and then I write down anywhere that I sense that I deceived myself or deceived somebody else, where I image crafted so that people would love me based on what I do. And then I confess that to God, and I receive the affirmation of my belovedness as a son, and then I resolve, God, help me tomorrow to do better with this. So so you can take your vice, think about what your virtue is, and then walk that out. There's a whole thinking within the Enneagram about what's called repressed centers, and everybody represses something, either thinking, doing, or feeling. Engaging that and raising that repressed center, I can't take the time to go into it, but that actually is one of the single most practical ways to move towards health. The third way I would say, too, that's really significant that we mentioned earlier is the wounding message. Like how we bring healing to the wounding message. And for most people, it usually ends up involving counseling or spiritual direction or some type of dealing with your family of origin to recognize where that wounding message happened in your life and how God wants to heal that. And then sharing that in a relationship, make sure your spouse knows that, for how we've seen the wounding message be healed with each other, how God uses us for each other.
And I was just going to add, along with the spiritual practices, I think something that every number can really benefit from is the practice of contemplation and
Centering prayer.
Yes. I'm blanking out. So it's a time where you are quiet and you are practicing silence and solitude, and you are letting any thought go that's coming to your mind, because you are drawing near to the Lord and He's drawing near to you. And it's this, it's kind of this mysterious practice where you don't really know exactly what God is doing, but I know for me, as I've reflected back on using this practice, it's been a really strengthening factor in my relationship with the Lord, and I think it's led me to greater health because I have just been open to what He's doing, and it for me also to sit and be quiet and have to learn to let go of those thoughts, which sometimes for a fear-based person can be a little bit nuts, is it's really good, and I think that helps me to be stronger. When I do have fear-based thoughts that come in, I can let them go faster.
Gotcha. So I think wounding message can go, and what the transformation might look like going from I'm not safe to I'm safe and courageous. The vice to virtue, you had brought up so many good practical tips about, okay, if my vice is I need to be successful, my identity comes there, and then checking for it at the end of the day and saying, okay, where did I fall back into the vice? Let me confess that and move to virtue. I know the repressed center, I know that that's really deep, but you can't, it's not fair to go, oh, repressed center, but I'm not going to tell you anything about it. Give somebody 2 to 3 sentences about what that means.
You might have to count my sentences.
Okay.
So we'll see how we do. The centers of intelligence, each number uses either thinking, feeling, or doing as their primary way to interpret and make sense of life. So a 3 that's feeling walks into a room and interprets the room first through feelings. A 7 interprets first through thinking. An 8 interprets first through doing, what needs to be done when they walk in the room. By the same token, each number has one on the other end of the scale that they don't use, that they have a tendency to repress or not use productively. And so we end up only using 2 of the 3. So again, the 3 are thinking, feeling, and doing. And every number has the tendency to use only 2. Like it's a 3-legged stool, but one of the legs got cut out, and you're only using 2. And even those 2 are struggling to hold you up. That's the repressed center. You're using 2 of 3, and even those 2 are struggling to help you interpret and make sense of life. And so you want to do the work of making sure that third one is involved. So for me, it's feelings. I want to set them aside. They're not productive for efficiency. But if I set them aside and I don't involve them in the story or what's going on, then my 2-legged stool is struggling to hold me up. But if I get that third leg in there, all 3 are now doing what they're supposed to do.
Gotcha.
So it's as simple as for me, like as a 3, and there's a couple other numbers that repress their feelings, 7s and 8s repress their feelings. It's as simple as working at the end of the day and thinking back, what are 2 feelings I had today? Literally, just 2 feelings. I do work with one-on-one clients. I have clients who are in this camp of repressed feelings, and I just have them at the end of the day journal 2, maybe 3 feelings from your day. It's been amazing to watch them say to me over the weeks of doing this, they become more conscious of their feelings through the day. When they know their own feelings, then they know the feelings of other people. And so the same is true for the others as well. It's a part of the Enneagram that is not quite known as much as some others. In particular, Suzanne Stabile refers to it often and does her work through this, what's called stances, and that's what that's about.
Gotcha. Okay. What advice would you give someone who are matched with the same numbers you are? So there may be people here watching who are a 6 and a 3. What would you share with them?
I would say remember that the 6 takes time to process, and so don't push them or rush them. Give grace and time for the conversations that need to happen.
And remember too that 6s think in questions, and so they're going to ask a lot of questions, and you're not in question. I have to remind myself of this a couple times a week in conversation with Betsie to remember that when she's asking me a lot of questions about something, she's not actually questioning me. So she asks me, what did I do today? Where did I eat? Who did I spend time with? She's not trying to dig up something and find something about me. Did I do something wrong today? But I could feel that. Or if we're talking about something with one of our kids and she's asking a lot of questions, it's not because she's assumed I'm going to make the wrong decision. But my mind wants to go there because it's all about success and failure for me. So I'm thinking, she's asking me all these questions. Am I failing? Does she already think I've done this wrong? She's not. She's just asking questions to know.
I want to ask about that because, so if your wounded message is, I'm not safe, you would interpret that as, I'm not making her safe, or what can I do to be safe, help her be safe. But did you think it was him, or it was just a state you were in, or did you think that he was doing something wrong that made you unsafe?
If she's asking me questions, you mean?
If she's feeling unsafe.
Oh, okay.
If you're feeling unsafe, I know, so that's kind of the vice or the wounded message. The way that you would interpret that is, what am I doing to make her feel unsafe? Or how do I make this safe? Success for you, success could be
is
defined.
keeping her safe.
Success is keeping her safe.
Yeah,
so
providing for her.
you would put the weight on your shoulders.
Right.
But let me ask you this. Did you think that it was his fault? Or did you just think this is something that's beyond him?
No, I don't really ever attribute it to David. I think I've felt such safety with him all along. It would just be that wounding message from growing up, that somehow
Is it growing
was a
up, or is it more of a
perception.
nature? Like, where's nature? Like, if you live in you said you had a very safe home, your parents, you had safety. Like, do you think that maybe we're born with the vice, or do you think we are not born with a vice and we develop it, learn it in our childhood?
Well, the Enneagram wisdom, most will say, is you're born with your type, but then you are nurtured to really experience your wounded message, either by reality or, remember, perceived reality.
Yeah, and I think that's probably where it was more for me, like perceived reality, as opposed to like, this is really what's happening. Maybe there were events here and there, even related to like my siblings, that I took on as like, this is not safe for me, when it was like just what was going on in their world a little bit more.
Like my messages were reaction to family situation. I don't ever really see them as being from my parents, but I see the environment in which I grew up in my family system, and I see what I did to myself to reinforce I need to be successful type of thing.
Got it.
So yeah, in that way. So nurture ends up just really like reinforcing that wounded message in that way. So. But yeah, so going back to the other piece, like her questioning me, just this week we had this happen where she was asking me questions, and I stopped her and I said, okay, I need to stop and tell you something. Right now, I am feeling like a complete failure in this situation. I don't think you actually think I'm a failure, but I need to tell you, because you keep asking me questions about this, I think I failed. And I'm starting to shut down, and I'm wanting to react to you. And I'm having to tell myself that you don't think I've failed. And it was really helpful because it kept us from, honestly, a conflict that was going to become me apologizing for my reaction, because my reaction was going to be all out of my own sense of failure, not because of anything she actually did, but I spoke up.
But you were handling it in a very healthy way.
We did, yes, in this case.
But how did you respond? I want to come back to a couple of things. There's so many things that you would say where I don't want to interrupt, but I just want to just go, wait a minute, explain more about that.
Yeah.
So he's sharing that with you. How did you respond?
Well, I tried to listen and take it in, and also like it brings me back to that thought of like, okay, if like my talk style is questions, but if I know that like I'm by asking him a lot of questions, he's gonna feel in question, like I need to be careful with how many questions I ask. And so it's just kind of like a self-awareness, like, okay, I wanna ask all these other questions, but maybe now isn't the time. And then we just, I stopped asking questions, and we kind of just talked it through, right? And
yeah, I had to do some little more explaining about what was happening, because, again, in just how we see, for her, it was like, how are my questions making you feel like a failure?
Right.
Like at first it didn't compute for you, but it really was literally like no, it's okay, it didn't compute. It's just how I see. Everything's about failure for me.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, as you're telling me, I'm thinking, wow, this is a really healthy way to respond. And then you're like, I had to apologize later. And I'm just wondering.
No, I didn't have to apologize
Oh,
later.
you did?
I would have, if I hadn't stopped.
You got it.
I would have reacted to her, and I would have been apologizing. Like, I'm sorry, I overreacted. It was internal. But because I stopped myself and spoke up.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, I handled it successfully. At least healthily.
All right, so last question. If you had a global stage to offer advice about relationships, what would you say?
I would say for your marriage, in particular, like it's really important that you fight drift. So, you mentioned this word earlier, but like if it's just really easy to kind of get comfortable in life. You both get busy, like you're tending to your family and you have activities and like your own individual, like things that you want to do and ways you want to grow. And it's just really easy to subtly drift away and not realize it until you just are like, what is going on? And so we fight that by trying to date every week, and we've been really blessed having David's mom in town, so we don't have a struggle with babysitting. And now that our kids are older, it's easier. But dating intentionally, and then also just like consciously thinking through, like, how many hours are we spending together this week? How many hours have we been together? And trying to make it a goal, like to have as many hours as possible. And some weeks are a lot better than others, but actually like thinking it through and being intentional is so important.
Yeah, when we reflect on our marriage, we would say the hardest part of our marriage, even with what happened in year 3, even all the hard things outside of us, the hardest part of our marriage where we have had to work the most is preventing drift. It's just so easy. And I think we would say too, from our marriage counseling experience with couples as in my pastoral role, either that I've done individually or that the times we've done it together, even if there's been mistakes by one or the other of the couple, almost always it's drift that led to that choice. So drift can lead to potentially the deeply tragic choice of that could be an affair, but drift can be just also lead to just the eventual separation of the kids are out of the house, we're empty nesters, and hi, what's your name? We haven't been together for 25 years as we raised kids, you know? And so it is work. And when we do premarital, we talk about this a lot. It's a couple of saying, this is work and you will have to work to keep yourselves from drifting because you're naturally going to do it. And you're gonna have to recognize that. And so what work will you put in? And again, that like, even the Enneagram here has been this awakening to 20 years in, there's so much I still don't know about her. And there's so much she still doesn't know about me. And when you have that mentality, I think that helps prevent drift because then there's still interest of like, oh, you still see things differently than I even recognized after 20 years. Fight drift.
That's great advice. Great advice. Well, I think that wraps it up. Thank you for coming. A lot of wisdom. I know that I'm going to rewatch this and take a lot of notes. So thanks for having us, and we will wrap it up right there.